why they buy, these are their pain points. Very few internal organizations do the exact same customer analysis. A few do, and they tend to be very, very successful at this. It's the same thing with relationship management. You would never have a good sales organization, right, without having relationship managers that talk to your customers all the time. The problem internally, particularly with budget-based corporate universities, is that your buyer is not a user. Right? So the person who funds you never takes any of your programs. And their perspective always is they're just looking at either what to add or what to cut. And since they have no personal experience, they're working on different data sets. Right? So part of the challenge there is to ensure that you have someone out there talking to your key customers, the people who pay the bill all the time, making sure you're delivering products and services that meet their demands. Right? When they turn around and need a new person to work on a project, do they have it? If not, then they turn to you and say, who's next? Who have I prepared to satisfy that? And if you're not doing those sort of things, you're just not meaningful to that customer. And when your budget gets cut, well, I'm sorry, that cut deserves to be. And that's the unfortunate measure with a lot of companies. They're still down there fighting. I go to lots of conferences, and everyone always asks me about return on investment. Now, I've had the good fortune in my career to be on the buy side, and the sell side, and on the research side. And when I've been a chief running officer, my answer always is, if I'm working on what the chief executive officer thinks is really smart, they never ask me to defend that decision. Right? Because they already think it's brilliant. So they don't ask me. They ask me to defend the things they don't understand. That's part of the problem. There's a lot of research out there on human resources which says fundamentally human resources is an immature function. If I get a bunch of finance guys together, we all sit down and we talk about net present value. None of us say, what do you mean by net present value? What do you mean? You get together a bunch of human resource executives or learning executives and we say, let's build a high potential program. The first question is, well, what do you mean by high potential? Is that a high potential or an emerging leader? What's the difference? I don't like the term. We don't use the term. Part of that is if you don't understand it, how can you expect your customers to understand it and fund it at a significant level? And that's part of the problem in the industry. Is that the terminology and things like that are just not clear enough for a lot of customers. Measurement always is a challenge. And part of the problem is understanding measurement that's relevant to the customers you're talking to. Now, we spend way too much time measuring effectiveness and not talking about return to the business. A lot of companies get to a point where their corporate university, part of their spend is really justified by the fact that they're reducing turnover. Right? They're improving retention. In a lot of markets which have real talent challenges, I know I personally have been asked to speak at job fairs. And what they're really trying to do with the job fair is say, if you come work for us, you get this sort of education. So they're not analyzing the return on investment relative to specific internal outcomes. They're saying, no, I dropped my turnover by 5 points. I'm getting a better class of candidate. I have 50% more people coming to my job fairs. Right? I'm getting a 15% better close rate out of my job fair. There's a lot of different metrics to look at on this that you can justify spending. And almost always when I do it, I separate spending into two things. I separate binary spending, which says, this is the spending you have to do. Right? Regulations say you have to do this, so this is not really a debate. So we fund that. Then we talk about the spending, which is about creating a difference in business. And always separate the two so we're not confusing the numbers. Right? Otherwise, you get left with only the base spending to satisfy regulatory demands. There's nothing left to really focus on the business, which means you've just removed yourself from being strategic. So all of these sort of data points are relevant. There's 11 common practices that we find on corporate universities around the world. Right? Now again, these are general practices. Different companies in different industries behave in different ways. And as I said earlier, when I showed you that chart of revenue per employee, some of those industries are getting a 1.6, 1.7, 1.8 times the revenue of their competitors. That gives you a lot of free cash to invest in things. Other companies, like raw material companies and things like that, where their success is much more dependent on having access to the raw materials and price, are going to get much less leverage out of their human resources. So all of these vary a lot depending on the industry. Do they strategic governing board, right? Being able to measure against customer expectations. Again, customers are people who pay. Differentiate that from your users, right? So we've got to be clear on it. Having a governing board that itself measures results and is accountable for results, right? So when the governing board asks you about return on investment, this is the question they should be answering. Right? This is accountability they have to have. It's not just the head of learning who has this or the head of human resources who has this. Right? Having an integrated measurement system, and integrated simply means it's a connection between the strategic goal down to the tactical goals. And I can measure X steps all along the way. It's easier said than done. This is definitely a hard thing to do in certain instances. Much easier to do in functional areas like supply chain or sales or things like that. Much harder to do in general areas where I'm preparing talent for 3 years from now. Very hard to do. When I was at Fidelity Investments, I had a lot of people who were very specific number crunching people. We wound up creating a method for discussing our talent as options, because everyone could understand options trading. We fundamentally said, if I invest $15,000 in you, and within 3 years, what kind of return do I get on that option? So unless I'm promoting you faster or getting more productivity out of you or something, then using the analogy, I haven't called my option, in which case that was a waste of investment. They understood it that way, and that was the road to connect them to spending more money. They understood then how to think about return on investment. And different companies have a different mental model, and that's really what you have to follow in these surveys. Again, the goals, measurement methods, being able to interact with your advisory board. A single IT infrastructure is almost a bit of a misstatement. It doesn't mean you have one system, but it means your systems talk to each other. So all of these things are important. And at the bottom, proposing training that is linked to results and the customer's authorization to proceed. You never assume year to year that you continue the program. You go back to the customer and have them reauthorize. That always puts them back in a position of agreeing that this is important, and if not, you stop for a moment and pause. Some things that top performers themselves